The cookout ended with the smell of charcoal and damp grass, but the bruise on my arm was still hot. Minutes later, my father's phone pinged. The neighbor's security cam footage. My stepmother, shoving me against the shed wall. She laughed it off as a playful slip, hugging Dad for the relatives. What she didn't know, I'm head of compliance at Redbridge Analytics, and a clip can open both legal and financial doors. I am Tessa Rowan, 31 years old, and I was standing apart from the party, a ghost at my own family's feast. The setting was my father's backyard in Braxton Ridge, a town built on the illusion of quiet, upper-middle-class stability. It was late Sunday afternoon, and a restless, humid wind whipped through the oak trees, carrying the acidic smell of charcoal lighter fluid and the sharp, green tang of pine sap from the woods bordering the property. Laughter, brittle and loud, erupted from the cluster of relatives near the deck. The air was thick with smoke, not from expensive hickory chips, but from cheap, mass-market briquettes charring hot dogs to oblivion. I ignored them. My focus was on the document in my hand, a single sheet of paper I'd printed from my work email before driving here. It was an invoice from Sutter Vitality, LLC. Marla's company, the line item that had snagged my professional attention, was for community welfare sponsorship, and it was attached to this very cookout. The attendee list I'd mentally cross-referenced felt thin. A dozen relatives, a few neighbors. It didn't track with the five-figure sum. My job, my life, is compliance. At Redbridge Analytics, I am the head of ethics and compliance. I don't just write the rules, I am the wall that enforces them. My world is built on data integrity, audit trails, and the cold, hard binary of right and wrong. This invoice, this party, felt profoundly, structurally wrong. Tessa, honey, come say hi to the neighbors. Marla Sutter's voice cut through my concentration. It was a voice engineered for placation, warm and syrupy. She was gliding across the lawn toward me, a vision in a white linen sundress, her blonde hair perfect, her smile relentless. My father's wife of 3 years. She didn't wait for my answer. She just kept coming, steering me with a light, proprietary hand on my back, away from the chatter, toward the relative privacy of the large, peeling shed at the edge of the property line. The smell of fertilizer and old gasoline hung in the air around it. "You look so serious," she murmured, her voice dropping, losing its public warmth. She stopped me, turning to face me, her back to the party, her shadow falling over me. The wind rustled the leaves above, but here, by the shed, the air was still and close. She raised her hand, a pantomime of affection, and placed it on my bicep, her fingers cool, her nails, perfectly manicured, pressed lightly against my skin as if to adjust the sleeve of my blazer, a piece of clothing I wore like armor, even here. "You really need to relax, sweetheart," she said. And then she shoved me. It wasn't a playful push, it was a violent, calculated thrust, powered by her entire body weight. Her fingers dug into my arm for leverage, and her shoulder drove into my chest. My balance evaporated. I stumbled backward, my shoulder blade cracking hard against the rough, unfinished wood of the shed wall. A sharp, splintering pain shot from my shoulder down to my elbow. My phone, the one holding the digital copy of her invoice, slipped from my other hand. It hit the damp grass with a soft, sickening thud. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. For a second, there was only the ringing in my ears and the throb in my back. Marla stepped closer, leaning in. Her mask of suburban hospitality was gone, replaced by something cold and reptilian. Her smile was still there, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Stop digging into my payments," she hissed, her breath a mix of Sauvignon Blanc and spearmint. "They are none of your concern. It's family." The word family hung in the air like an accusation, but the shock was already receding, replaced by the familiar, cold click of my professional mind engaging. The pain was just a data point. The threat was an admission. I was no longer a stepdaughter at a barbecue. I was a compliance officer receiving a threat from a hostile vendor. I took one, controlled breath, centering myself. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rub my shoulder. Though it burned, I met her gaze. "Marla," I said, and my voice was the one I used in boardrooms, flat and devoid of emotion. "You are a registered vendor for my company. Your LLC is subject to our standard procurement policies. I sent a routine reconciliation request." The blankness in my eyes must have startled her more than any scream would have. She needed a fight, an emotional outburst, something she could twist. I gave her a procedure. Her face tightened. Then, as quickly as she had snapped, she recalibrated. A bright theatrical laugh burst from her. She spun around, facing the party, throwing her hands up in the air as if exasperated by my charming clumsiness. "Oh, goodness! Tessa tripped right over her own feet," she called out, her voice ringing with false cheer. "This clumsy girl, always in her own head." She dismissed me. With one sentence, she had gaslighted the entire backyard, recasting an assault as a girlish blunder. She turned her back to me, the ultimate power move, leaving me by the shed, reduced and invalidated. I bent, my shoulders screaming in protest, and retrieved my phone. The screen was spiderwebbed, but the device was on. As my fingers closed around it, it vibrated in my palm. A new text message from Mr. Henderson, my father's neighbor to the left, a quiet, retired engineer who lived alone and valued his privacy and his property line with equal fervor. The message was 3 short sentences. "Got the backyard clip. That was not a trip. Just in case." I didn't look up immediately. I let the words sink in. Got the clip. I swiped the notification away, my thumb tracing the new cracks in the glass. My gaze lifted slowly, moving past Marla, who was now accepting a sympathetic pat from an aunt, past the smoking grill. Over the top of the 6-foot cedar fence that separated our properties, I saw it, Mr. Henderson's side door security camera. It wasn't a doorbell cam. It was a high-definition unit, aimed perfectly to cover his driveway, the fence line, and, incidentally, the entire patch of ground where I was standing. Its tiny red infrared light was pulsing, a steady, rhythmic blink, an objective, time-stamped, high-fidelity witness. It wasn't just observing, it was recording. "Tessa, honey, are you okay?" My father. He was finally jogging over, his face a familiar mask of anxious concern, his spatula still in hand. He was a good man, but one who operated on a desperate need for domestic peace, a peace Marla had weaponized. "He never made it to me." Marla, seeing him approach, intercepted him like a heat-seeking missile. She launched herself into his arms, burying her face in his chest in a flawless performance of a flustered, concerned wife. "Oh, Robert, thank goodness," she cried, her voice muffled by his shirt. "Tessa just stumbled. I think I startled her when I tried to catch her. She nearly gave me a heart attack." He hesitated, his arms closing around her reflexively. She tripped?" "Yes, right by the shed. My goodness, clumsy girl." He patted her back, his anxiety visibly easing, redirected from me to her. Okay, it's all right, Marla. Shh, she's fine." He looked over Marla's shoulder at me, his expression pleading. "Don't make a scene, Tess, please." I stood up straight, ignoring the fire in my shoulder. I brushed a chip of peeling paint from my blazer. I looked at them. The perfect tableau of the concerned husband and the devoted wife. The lie was so complete, so suffocating. It had its own gravity. The wind died down for a moment, and in the sudden quiet, my voice, though spoken calmly, cut through the air like breaking glass. "It's just a joke," I said, meeting my father's eyes over Marla's head. "It's all just a joke, until it's in an investigative file." Silence. The only sound was the sudden, sharp sizzle of a hot dog bursting on the grill. Marla's back went rigid in my father's arms. He froze, his hand still raised to pat her. The laughter from the deck died. The cookout was over. The drive home from Braxton Ridge was a 40-minute exercise in controlled breathing. The lingering scent of burnt sugar and cheap hot dogs clung to the upholstery of my car, a phantom of the facade I had just left behind. My shoulder throbbed with a dull, insistent rhythm, a physical reminder of the moment the unspoken rules of our fragile family had been replaced by the blunt force of Marla's ambition. Each pulse of pain was a data point, logging the exact cost of my father's manufactured piece. This piece, his prized possession, had been installed 3 years ago. My father, Robert Rowan, a man whose grief after my mother's death had left him hollowed out and adrift, met Marla Sutter at a local Chamber of Commerce mixer. She was a whirlwind of organizational prowess and sunny, can-do optimism. Within 6 months, they were married. Marla didn't just move in. She executed a corporate-style takeover of our lives. My mother's chaotic, love-filled system of bills paid when remembered and insurance policies filed in a shoebox was replaced by color-coded binders and automated payments. Marla sorted out my father's retirement accounts, streamlined his health insurance, and, most significantly, applied for a supplementary credit card on his primary account in her name. It was all done under the guise of making things easier for you, darling. My father, relieved to have the administrative burden of his own life lifted, saw a savior. I saw a CEO acquiring a new, vulnerable subsidiary. The Cookout started almost immediately. They were branded as community-building events, a way to weave our two families together. What they were, I soon realized, was a stage for Marla to perform the role of the perfect matriarch, and a testing ground for her burgeoning enterprise, Sutter Vitality LLC. The first time I saw the Redbridge Analytics logo at one of these gatherings, it was on a flimsy, hand-lettered sign propped against a cooler of store-brand soda. Community Wellness Day, generously supported by Redbridge Analytics. I had stared at it, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Later that evening, while helping my father clear the deck, I'd casually mentioned it. "I saw the sign," I'd said, keeping my tone light. "I didn't know we were sponsoring community events now. I must have missed the memo." My father stopped stacking plastic plates. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Oh, that was just Marla's little touch. You know how she is. So proud of where you work." He turned to go back inside, but paused at the sliding glass door. "Tessa, don't bring your work into this house, please." The message was clear. Don't ask questions. Don't apply your rules here. Don't look too closely. To question the sign was to question Marla. To question Marla was to disturb the peace, and the peace was non-negotiable. So I stopped asking questions out loud. Soon after, another character was added to the recurring cast of these weekend performances. Marla's son, Jace. He was introduced as a certified wellness consultant and the lead practitioner for Sutter Vitality. Jace was in his late 20s, with the soft hands of someone who had never worked a hard day and the serene, vacant smile of someone who had attended one too many self-actualization seminars. His credentials were as vague as his advice. He'd lead mindfulness sessions on the lawn, instructing my increasingly bewildered aunts and uncles to embrace their energetic truth and visualize their optimal fiscal pathways. It was corporate jargon repurposed as spiritual guidance, and it was utterly meaningless. In public, Marla curated my image carefully. To the relatives, I was our Tessa, so brilliant but a little dry. To her friends, I was Robert's lovely daughter, a bit of a stickler for the rules, but we adore her. The subtext was always the same. I was the rigid, unfun obstacle in her world of free-flowing, positive energy. The praise was always double-edged, a compliment wrapped around a criticism. Privately, when she thought I was out of earshot, the language was less generous. I once overheard her on the phone in the kitchen, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. "It's that aggressive girl with her rulebook again. You'd think she was auditing life itself." She wasn't wrong. Every weekend became another data-gathering opportunity. The lawn yoga, where no one actually did yoga. The gift baskets filled with cheap scented candles and a business card for Sutter Vitality. And always, the sign. Sometimes printed, sometimes handwritten, but always there. Sponsored by Redbridge. I started documenting it all with the dispassionate precision of an auditor. I took photos of the signs on my phone. I saved the effusive email invitations from Marla, all of which BCC'd a mysterious billing@SutterVitality.com. I pocketed the catering receipts left on the counter, the ones that listed corporate engagement event as the purpose, paid for with the supplementary card that drew from my father's account. Each photograph, each PDF, each scanned piece of paper was saved to a secure folder on my encrypted drive. The name of the folder was simple: Sutter/Vitality. About a month ago, my father found me in his home office. I was on my laptop, cross-referencing a Sutter Vitality invoice I'd discovered in the Redbridge system with a photo I'd taken of a grocery receipt from one of the cookouts. The numbers didn't align. The invoice was inflated by a factor of 10. He didn't ask what I was doing. He knew. His shoulders slumped, and the lines around his eyes deepened. He looked older than his 60 years. "Tess," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Let it go." "Dad, this is—" "I know what you think it is," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "Just don't make a fuss. The house is quiet. We're a family. It's peaceful now. Can't that be enough?" I looked at him, at the desperation in his eyes. He wasn't asking me to ignore a crime. He was begging me to preserve his sanctuary. He had outsourced his happiness to Marla, and he couldn't bear the thought of auditing the terms of the deal. His trust in her wasn't a product of love or conviction. It was a curtain he had deliberately pulled down to block out a reality he didn't want to see. My job, my very nature, is to be the harsh, uncompromising light that shines right through curtains like that. I looked from his tired face to the screen of my laptop. I saw the grease stain on the digital image of the catering receipt, a dark bloom on the paper. The peace he cherished was being bought, subsidized by fraudulent charges billed to my employer. It was a peace built on a lie I was professionally and ethically bound to expose. "It should be enough, Dad," I had told him, closing the laptop, but we both knew it wasn't. Now, sitting in the sterile quiet of my own apartment, the events of the afternoon replayed in my mind not as a memory, but as a sequence of actionable events. The shove was not just an assault. It was a vendor threatening a compliance officer. Marla's hissing threat was not just a family argument. It was a clear attempt to obstruct a corporate inquiry. The curtain of my father's denial had always been thin, translucent. He chose not to see the shadows moving behind it, but this afternoon, with a single, violent push against a woodshed wall, Marla Sutter hadn't just bruised my shoulder. She had ripped that curtain right down the middle. The throb in my shoulder had subsided to a dull, electric ache by Monday morning, a physical metronome ticking beneath the crisp white cotton of my shirt. At 7:00 a.m., I badged into the Redbridge Analytics Tower. The lobby was a cathedral of brushed steel and blue-tinted glass, silent save for the whisper of the ventilation. Here, there was no smell of charcoal or damp grass. There was only the sterile scent of industrial carpet cleaner and the faint, ozone hum of servers processing billions of data points. Redbridge Analytics is a consumer data behemoth. We don't sell products. We sell predictive behavior. We tell companies what you will buy, who you will vote for, and when you will change your insurance provider. Our currency is trust, and our foundation is regulation. My world, my domain, is the 27th floor, compliance and business ethics. I am the head of that department. My team and I are the internal police, the auditors, and the priests who hear the company's confessions. My guiding principle is simple. Compliance is a glass hammer. It's built to be transparent, entirely visible, and governed by inflexible rules. Everyone sees it. They know what it's for. But when it's finally used, it's not a warning. It strikes once, and it shatters the problem completely. And Marla Sutter had just placed herself directly under it. The Redbridge Code of Conduct, A 112-page document I had personally rewritten and ratified with the board was explicit. Section 4A, Conflicts of Interest, Related Parties, was ironclad. It states that no employee, contractor, or officer of Redbridge, my title, may engage in a business relationship with a related party without full, prior disclosure and independent, third-party vetting. A related party is defined to include spouses, children, stepchildren, and critically, the spouse of a parent, Marla, as my father's wife, was a related party to me, a senior vice president and officer of the corporation. For her to become a vendor, she would have needed to pass a vetting process so rigorous it was designed to be prohibitive. She hadn't. She had, instead, tried to sneak in through a side door. Sutter Vitality, LLC, first appeared on my radar 6 weeks ago. It wasn't a formal application. It was a line item in a quarterly discretionary spending report from the Human Resources Department's wellness budget. The payment was a clean, round $15,000. Round numbers are the first red flag. They signal laziness, a lack of itemization, and often fraud. The description was pure corporate vaporware. Community mindfulness sessions. I pulled the string. Another invoice from the previous quarter surfaced. $10,000 for family bonding cookouts. A third, smaller one, $7,500 for wellness synergy planning. The vendor address was a UPS store mailbox. The tax ID number was valid, registered to Marla Sutter. I immediately and quietly opened a pre-audit file. This was before the shove, before the direct threat. This was just procedure. I sent a standardized, low-priority request from my departmental inbox, not my personal one, to both HR and accounts payable. The request was polite, bureaucratic, and non-negotiable. I asked for all associated contracts, statements of work, lists of services rendered, any practitioner certifications for their consultants, JACE, and most importantly, the verified employee attendee lists for these sessions. The response I got from HR was telling. It wasn't a file. It was an email from a mid-level benefits manager. "Hi, Tessa," it read. "Oh, that's just a small pilot program we're running. It was highly suggested by Robert's team as a favor." A casual, brilliant lie. It implicated my father, using his name to create a shield, while simultaneously implying that I, his daughter, was already aware and had given my tacit approval. It was designed to make me back off, to make a formal inquiry seem like a breach of an unspoken family understanding. I had replied with a single, cold sentence. "Please forward the requested documentation by end of day, as per standard audit protocol." The paper trail I uncovered was thin but damning. The suggestion hadn't come from my father's team. It had come from an HR manager who, a quick social media search revealed, was in Marla's weekend yoga photos. She had strongly suggested Sutter Vitality be added to the pilot program, leveraging her proximity to me and my father to bypass procurement. Now sitting at my desk as the sun hit the 27th floor glass, I had the final piece of evidence, the invoice from yesterday. I had driven straight home from my father's house, my shoulder a burning knot. I'd bypassed my apartment's main entrance, taking the service elevator to the secure parking garage. In the concrete silence of my own home, I began the formal procedure. First, I documented my own injury. I took high-resolution, time-stamped photographs of the angry red and purple bruise blooming on my arm and the raw scrape on my shoulder blade where it had hit the unfinished wood. Second, I took the physical invoice I'd retrieved from my father's desk before I left. It was exactly as I'd expected, printed on cheap resume paper. The Redbridge Analytics logo was slightly pixelated, printed from a desktop label maker and physically stuck, crookedly, to the top of the page, and the most critical missing detail. There was no PO number. No purchase order number means no formal request, no budget approval, and no legitimate entry into our payment system. It was a ghost invoice, designed to be paid out by a friendly contact in HR without oversight. I placed the invoice, the printed photographs of my injuries, and the cracked screen protector from my phone into a large, tamper-proof evidence bag. I signed and dated the seal, Third, I sat at my home terminal and opened a new file. This was no longer a pre-audit. This was a formal investigation. I began to write the incident report. My fingers flying across the keyboard, I detailed the time, the location, my father's address, and the parties involved. The rules I had written, the labyrinthine policies that most employees found tedious, were now my shield and my sword. Section 4, Conflict of Interest, was the shield. Section 9C, Vendor Conduct and Anti-Harassment, was the sword. It explicitly stated that any vendor or agent of a vendor who engages in harassment, threats, or physical violence against any Redbridge employee will be subject to immediate contract termination and potential legal action. Marla's mistake was fundamental. She saw me as a stepdaughter to be manipulated. She failed to see me as the head of compliance, an officer of the corporation she was actively defrauding. A simple push in a backyard is a domestic dispute. It's a messy, he said, she said affair. But a vendor physically assaulting a corporate officer during an active audit, while uttering a direct threat to stop that audit, stop digging into my payments, is not a domestic dispute. It is a nexus event. It links benefits fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and assault. It transforms a family squabble into a clear D&O, directors and officers, liability issue. It activates the full terrifying power of the corporate legal and security apparatus. The rules I wrote were there to protect the company, but they were also there to protect our people. And today, I was our people. The glass hammer was now, officially, in my hand, and I was about to swing. I was back in my apartment. The silence of the space a stark contrast to the forced cheer of the cookout. The bruise on my shoulder was already darkening from an angry red to a deep, mottled purple. I had finished documenting it, along with the scrape on my shoulder blade, each time-stamped photograph a cold, objective record. My phone, the cracked one, buzzed on the granite countertop. A new message from Mr. Henderson. Here is a secure link to the file. Dropbox. Let me know if you have trouble. I keep high-resolution archives of all perimeter activity. I sent a brief, formal reply. Mr. Henderson, file received. I cannot thank you enough for your diligence. His reply was almost instantaneous. Don't thank me. Need me to testify. Just say, I never liked her loud parties. A new icon appeared on my desktop. Backyard Cam 1744.mp4. I clicked it. The video player opened. There was no cinematic buildup, no musical score. It was just raw, high-definition data from a wide-angle lens. The file was exactly 36 seconds long. The timestamp in the corner read UN10-19, 1744-12. It aligned perfectly with the metadata of my phone's network log. The moment it had briefly disconnected from my father's Wi-Fi as it hit the grass. The frame was wide, capturing the shed, the patchy lawn, and the edge of the deck. I saw myself, standing apart. I saw Marla approach, her linen dress a bright white against the drab brown of the shed. I watched, as if observing a stranger, as she placed her hand on my arm. Then, the action. It was worse than I remembered. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't a trip. It was a deliberate, two-handed shove. Marla's face, captured clearly by the lens, was twisted in a mask of pure reptilian spite. I saw my own body jerk backward, my shoulder connecting violently with the wood. I saw my phone fly from my hand. And the audio, the camera's microphone was sensitive, designed to pick up distant sounds. It caught her voice, not as a whisper, but as a sharp, sibilant hiss that cut through the background noise of the party. Stop digging into my payments. 36 seconds, a comprehensive record of assault, motive, and intent. My professional training took over. This was no longer a personal video, it was Exhibit A. My hands moved with procedural certainty. First, I authenticated the asset. I ran the MP4 file through a command line utility to extract its digital fingerprint, its SHA-256 hash, A long, complex string of 64 characters appeared on my screen. This hash was now the file's legal identity. Any change to the file, even by a single bit of data, would irrevocably alter that hash. It was my proof against any claims of tampering or editing. Second, I created the chain of custody. I opened a new, encrypted document and began to type. Document, chain of custody, Sutter R1, asset, backyard lot cam 17.4 SHA-256, hash E3B42, full 64-character string. Source, Alan Henderson, neighbor. His address, via secure cloud transfer. Received by Tessa Rowan, head of compliance. My address, 1019, 2025, 2014 Estast. Description: 36-second video file documenting physical assault and verbal threat by vendor, Marla Sutter, Sutter Vitality LLC, against a Redbridge corporate officer, Tessa Rowan. Third, I aggregated the corroborating evidence. I pulled the high-resolution photos I had just taken of my injuries. I opened the metadata, the EXIF data, for each file. IMG 8812. And see? Close-up of shoulder bruise. Timestamp 10/19/2025, 1952 EST. GPS 40.7359 DEN, 73991 DW, my apartment coordinates. IMG 8809. I see. Photo of scraped shed wall. Timestamp 10/19/2025, 1747 AST. GPS 40.6122 DN, 74.439 DW, my father's house coordinates. The timeline was perfect. The video showed the assault at 1744. My own photo, taken on my cracked phone immediately after, logged me at the exact same GPS location at 1747, documenting the scuff mark my shoulder had left on the wood. The photos of the injury, taken later at my home, showed the physical result. I bundled everything into a single, password-protected, encrypted archive. The video, the hash-stamped chain of custody PDF, the GPS-tagged photos of the shed, the time-stamped photos of my bruises. I addressed an email to my personal attorney, a man I kept on retainer specifically for moments like this. Subject: for your records, do not open, await instructions. I attached the encrypted archive and hit send. This created an immutable, time-stamped third-party record of the evidence, insulating it from any corporate or personal interference. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. On Monday morning, at my desk on the 27th floor, I opened the formal investigation file, Sutter Vitality Vendor Review. I didn't upload the video to the general attachments. I navigated to the specific subsections of the audit protocol I had written myself. I uploaded one copy to the folder marked Section 9, Vendor Conduct Risk. I uploaded a second copy to the folder marked Section 11, Violence Harassment Nexus, Employee Protection. A simple push in a backyard, witnessed by relatives, is a domestic spat. It's an ugly scene. It's noise. It's designed to be denied, minimized, and gaslit away. Marla was counting on that. She was counting on the messy emotional ambiguity of family. But a 36-second, high-definition video, with clear audio of a threat related to corporate payments, time-stamped, hash-verified, GPS corroborated, and entered as evidence into an active vendor fraud investigation, is not noise. It is a signal. It is the purest, most objective variable imaginable. It transforms the entire equation. I do not want blood. I am not a brawler. I am a compliance officer. I don't win arguments by raising my voice. I win them by completing the file. I wanted the truth, compiled and indexed, to land on a table with a weight that was purely procedural. I wanted a simple, undeniable, black and white reality. Marla thinks this is about an ugly evening. She thinks she pushed me, embarrassed me, and put me in my place. She believes the worst possible outcome is a few angry text messages and an awkward Thanksgiving. She has no idea what I know. I was there when my father's lawyer advised him on the prenuptial agreement. I was the one who insisted on a specific conduct and integrity clause, one that linked personal and professional misdeeds. I know that Marla Sutter's access to my father's estate is contingent on her not committing any act of documented fraud, financial malfeasance, or substantiated physical violence or harassment. Marla thinks a video clip can ruin a party. I know this one can collapse a fraudulent, limited liability company, and I know it can trigger a prenup. With the video secured and the incident report filed, the emotional component of the investigation was over. Now came the part I lived for. The cold, clean, beautiful math of the money trail. Emotion is subjective. A transaction is a fact. Marla's world was built on feelings, impressions, and plausible deniability. My world is built on general ledgers, swift codes, and immutable blockchain entries. I was about to drag her from her world into mine. The first step was to deconstruct her corporate shield, Sutter Vitality LLC. It took less than 5 minutes on the state's Division of Corporations database. The LLC was registered 18 months ago. The sole registered agent and principal was Marla Sutter. The address listed was not a brick-and-mortar office but a commercial mail receiving agency, a UPS store in a strip mall 3 towns over, a virtual address, a corporate ghost. It was the first sign of a shell company, designed not to conduct business, but to receive money. With my access privileges at Redbridge, I could see the payment history. Our funds were transferred from a Redbridge holding account directly to Sutter Vitality's primary business account at a major national bank. Standard procedure. But from there, the money didn't sit. I couldn't legally subpoena her bank records. But I didn't need to. I had something better. My father. 2 months ago, during a visit, my father had asked me to help him with his online banking, complaining that Marla had set up all these new accounts and it's too confusing. While I was helping him, I had noticed a recurring transfer from his personal checking account to an account he didn't recognize. The memo line was always SV transfer. I had made a note of the account number. Now, I cross-referenced it. The Redbridge payments to Sutter Vitality were being immediately transferred, minus a small holding amount, to this secondary, intermediary account, an account that was jointly held by Marla and, unbeknownst to him, my father. From that joint account, the money moved again, large withdrawals, not to vendors or for business expenses, but to American Express. I pulled the statements for the supplementary credit card Marla held on my father's account, and there it was. The money paid by Redbridge for community mindfulness sessions had been used to pay for a 2-week, all-inclusive vacation to a 5-star resort in St. Bart's for her and Jace. The trip was categorized on the credit card statement as TNE, Retreat Site Scouting, a fraudulent corporate expense, laundered through a shell company, paid for by my employer, and facilitated through my own father's bank account. It was a closed loop of breathtaking arrogance. The smaller expenses were just as damning. I went back to the folder on my encrypted drive, the one labeled Sutter Vitality. I opened the photos of the receipts I had collected from the cookouts over the last year. Receipts from Costco, from Whole Foods, from the local liquor superstore, all paid for with the supplementary Amex, all categorized on the statements as employee engagement supplies, the hot dogs, the cheap briquettes, the cases of light beer. They had all been billed to Redbridge under the guise of corporate wellness. We, the family, were the unwitting employees being engaged. The fraud bled from the professional into the deeply personal. I logged into my father's tax preparation software, for which I still had the password. I pulled his return from last year, the first full year he was married to Marla. My eyes scanned the deductions, and there, on Schedule C, profit or loss from business, was a line-item deduction for $25,000 paid to a consultant. The name of the consultancy firm listed was Sutter Vitality LLC. The description of services rendered Family Health and Wellness Consulting. She was billing a fraudulent corporate entity, then having my father pay that same entity as a consultant so he could take a tax deduction on the money she was already stealing. She was double-dipping, using him as both the source and the shield. Now I turned my attention inward, to Redbridge itself. A ghost invoice cannot be paid without a ghost in the machine. I traced the internal client code assigned to Sutter Vitality. It was a temporary code, the kind used for one-off payments to avoid the full vendor vetting process. It had been approved and pushed through by a single person, Sheila Vance, the mid-level HR manager whose face I recognized from Marla's social media. Sheila had overridden the system's security flags, using her administrative credentials to manually approve the payments. She was the internal accomplice. The money trail for Jace was even more direct. Several transfers from the joint account went directly to the Eastman Academy for Holistic Arts, a non-accredited online school. The memo line for each transfer was, Jace Sutter, stipend. Marla wasn't just funding her lifestyle. She was using Redbridge's money to pay for her son's fabricated career. This led me to the contracts. There were 3 short-term service agreements on file, all signed by Sheila Vance on behalf of Redbridge. I pulled up the digital signature logs. The cryptographic timestamp on a digital signature is absolute. Sheila's signature on the first contract was logged on April 12th at 2:15 p.m. The signature on the second contract, dated 2 months later, was logged on June 18th at 10:30 a.m., but the signature on the third contract, dated September 5th, carried the exact same cryptographic timestamp as the first one, April 12th, 2:15 p.m. It was impossible. A digital signature is generated at the moment of signing. You cannot sign a document in September and have it generate a timestamp from April. It meant the signature itself, the secure, encrypted image file, had been copied from the first contract and pasted onto the third. It was a clumsy, amateur act of forgery, the kind of mistake a person makes when they believe no one is smart enough or meticulous enough to ever check. The final thread was Jace himself, his entire value proposition. The justification for the wellness services rested on his expertise. The contracts described him as a certified master of somatic energy. I ran the certification through every professional standards board and accrediting body in North America. I searched academic databases and professional registries. The result came back in less than a second. No such certification exists. No person named Jace Sutter held any accredited degree in psychology, counseling, or physical therapy. The title, the expertise, the entire foundation of Sutter Vitality's billable services was a complete and utter fiction. And so, the map was complete. It began with a cheap, crookedly placed logo on an invoice for a Sunday barbecue. That invoice was the trailhead. It was the loose thread, the insignificant detail that everyone else, my father, my relatives, the overworked people in HR, was conditioned to ignore. It was just a cookout, just a small expense, just a family thing. But they were wrong. The cookout wasn't an anomaly. It was a critical, repeating link in a chain of systematic fraud. It was the public face of a private conspiracy. It was the place where all the threads, the corporate malfeasance, the tax evasion, the forgery, the personal betrayal, came together. Everyone else saw a party. I saw a crime scene, and I was the only one holding the map. By Tuesday morning, the map of the money was complete. It was a sprawling, damning flowchart of greed and incompetence. But a map is not a weapon. A map is a plan. To make it a weapon, I had to activate the one thing Marla Sutter could never understand, navigate, or defeat: the Redbridge corporate compliance machine. My first move was a masterpiece of procedural irony. At 9:00 a.m., I logged into Redbridge's third-party ethics and reporting portal. It's an encrypted, secure system designed to allow any employee, from a janitor to a CEO, to report misconduct anonymously. I am the system's chief administrator. I wrote its user agreement. I designed the triage protocols for incoming reports. I knew its every strength and every loophole. I clicked Submit a new report. I filled out the fields not as Tessa Rowan, head of compliance, but as a concerned employee. Nature of concern: conflict of interest, vendor fraud, harassment, individuals involved. Marla Sutter. Vendor, Sutter Vitality, LLC. Sheila Vance, HR Manager. Detailed description. I laid out the core facts in dry, dispassionate language. I detailed the undisclosed relationship between a corporate officer, myself, referred to only by my title, and the vendor. I outlined the pattern of suspicious invoices, the forged digital signature, the lack of a PO number, and the billing for services not rendered. I concluded with a single, explosive sentence. Furthermore, the vendor in question physically assaulted the corporate officer on October 19th in an attempt to obstruct this investigation, an act which was captured on video. I did not attach the video, not yet. I clicked Submit. The system generated a unique, anonymous case number, R20258814. I logged out, then I logged back in using my administrator credentials. On my departmental dashboard, a new high-priority alert was flashing. Case R20258814. I opened it, then, using my executive privileges, I added a single, crucial tag to the file. Insider submitted, credible threat. This tag was a kill switch I had built into the system. It bypassed the lower levels of review and triggered an automatic, mandatory convening of the Redbridge Ethics Subcommittee within 48 hours. I had just anonymously reported myself to myself, and in doing so, had forced the hand of the entire corporate legal structure. The whistleblower was now officially running the investigation. My next click was on my calendar. I sent a single meeting invitation. To General Counsel, Head of Internal Audit, Chief Human Resources Officer, Lead Independent Director. Subject, Urgent, Ethics Subcommittee Meeting. Case R20258814. Time, Wednesday, 10:03 a.m. The trap was being built, piece by procedural piece. With the corporate mechanism in motion, I turned to the personal front. I called my father. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight with anxiety. Tessa? Hi, Dad. I'm calling to inform you of a work matter. As a professional courtesy, my tone was flat, the one I used for legal disclosures. There was no daughter in my voice. What is it? He asked, his voice a whisper. My department has opened a formal investigation into a vendor for suspected benefits fraud and threatening the conduct of a corporate officer. It's a serious breach. Silence. I could hear him breathing. I knew the question he was terrified to ask. I made him ask it. I am not going to say the vendor's name, Dad. That would be a breach of protocol. If you want to know the name, you'll have to ask me directly. I waited. The silence stretched for 10, then 15 seconds. It was the sound of a man standing at the edge of a cliff, refusing to look down. No, he finally choked out. Okay. Thank you for telling me. Of course, I said. Have a good day. I hung up. I had given him his chance to be an ostrich, to bury his head in the sand, but the sand was about to be washed away. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone lit up with a text message. It was from Marla. Tessa, whatever you are doing, you need to stop. You are breaking your father's heart. This family is finally at peace. Don't ruin it with your corporate games. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She positioned herself as the protector of my father's feelings, casting me as the cold, destructive villain. She called my investigation a game. She was trying to pull me back onto her territory, the messy, illogical battlefield of family drama. I refused. My fingers typed a reply, each letter a cold, hard stone. The law is not emotional, Marla, and neither is a video. I hit send. There was no reply. The rest of the day was a checklist. I drafted a formal vendor notice of investigation and request for documentation on Redbridge letterhead. It was a standard, terrifying legal document. It requested, by order of the Ethics Subcommittee, all contracts, invoices, bank statements for the LLC, practitioner certifications for Jace Sutter, and all correspondence related to Redbridge business. I addressed it to Marla Sutter, registered agent for Sutter Vitality LLC, at her UPS store mailbox address. I sent it via certified mail with a digital copy to her email. The deadline for compliance was 10 business days. Failure to comply would result in immediate contract termination and a potential referral to law enforcement. The trap now had teeth. Next, I left the office for an hour. I went to the county courthouse. In the clerk's office, I filled out a petition for a temporary harassment restraining order. In the section for evidence, I wrote, "Video evidence of physical assault and verbal threats. See attached USB drive." The clerk, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, took my paperwork, glanced at the description, and stamped it without a word. A hearing was set for Friday. Until then, Marla was legally forbidden from contacting me, coming within 100 yards of my home or workplace, or harassing me through third parties. I had officially separated the corporate from the personal. One was a vendor review, the other was an assault case. She could no longer conflate the two. My last stop was a small cafe near Mr. Henderson's neighborhood. He was already there, a neat, precise man in a pressed shirt. I slid a single piece of paper and a pen across the table. It was a sworn affidavit. It simply stated that he, Alan Henderson, was the owner of the security system at his address, and that the file named Backyard Cam 17.44.mp4 with the corresponding SHA 256 hash was an unaltered, original recording from that system, captured on the date and time specified. He read it carefully, his engineering mind appreciating the precision. He took the pen and signed his name with a firm, steady hand. "Happy to help," he said, pushing the paper back to me. "Truth is truth." I slid the affidavit into a protective sleeve. The chain of custody for my Exhibit A was now legally airtight and witnessed. Back in my car, I sat for a moment in the quiet. I reviewed the day's work, the anonymous report, now a high-priority internal investigation, the ethics subcommittee, now legally obligated to act, the vendor freeze, which would be proposed and almost certainly passed tomorrow, cutting off her cash flow, my father, neutralized by his own willful ignorance, Marla, silenced by a text message and soon to be served with a court order, the evidence, now legally fortified and indisputable. Every door was closing. Every exit was being sealed. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't had a single emotional confrontation. I had simply used the rules. Her strategy was to create chaos, to operate in the gray areas of family and feelings. My strategy was to build a cage of pure, cold, black and white procedure around her. The cage was now finished. All that was left was for her to realize she was in it. Wednesday, 9:00 a.m., the 27th floor, Conference Room 4. This room was my design, a place built for surgical precision. The north wall was a single sheet of floor-to-ceiling glass. It didn't look out over a park or a river. It faced the I-95 interchange, a massive, unceasing river of white-hot steel and noise. But the soundproofing was so absolute that the chaos was silent. A frantic, muted film. The light it cast was not warm. It was a flat, clinical, white-gray. The table was a 20-foot slab of black, polished granite, so reflective it looked like a dark, still body of water. The members of the ethics subcommittee were already seated when I arrived. Our general counsel, David, a man who lived in pinstripes, the head of internal audit, Mark Davies, who looked like his skin was made of parchment, the chief human resources officer, Sarah Riley, a woman I respected for her iron will, and at the far end, Miles Harding, the lead independent director, who had flown in from Chicago for this. He was the board's representative, the executioner, if one was needed. There was no small talk, just the quiet shush of the HVAC system and the clicking of Mark's pen. I sat at the head of the table, plugging my laptop into the port. My reflection stared back at me from the granite. A woman in a severe charcoal suit, her face calm, her hands steady. At 9:02 a.m., the door opened. Marla Sutter entered. She was not in her wellness attire. She had attempted a power suit, a beige number that was slightly too large in the shoulders. She clutched a thin beige leather portfolio. Beside her, Jace looked like a child in an adult's costume, his open-collared shirt revealing a puka shell necklace. He looked terrified. And with them was their lawyer. I knew his type instantly. A strip mall solo practitioner. His suit a size too large. His briefcase scuffed. His eyes were darting around the room, taking in the 27th floor view, the expensive chairs. He was out of his depth and he knew it. He was a goldfish in a shark tank. "Thank you for coming," I said. My voice was amplified slightly by the room's microphones, bouncing flatly off the glass. "Please sit. This is vendor review case R2025-8814. I am Tessa Rowan, head of compliance, and I am leading this inquiry on behalf of the ethics subcommittee." They sat. The lawyer, a Mr. Klein, immediately opened his thin folder, which contained what looked like a 3-page printout. I didn't give him a chance to speak. I clicked the remote, and the 80-inch screen on the wall lit up. "I will be presenting the findings of the pre-audit," I said. "You will have an opportunity to respond at the end." First slide. Red Bridge, Code of Conduct, Section 4A. "Section 4A of our corporate code," I began, my voice a steady monotone, "strictly prohibits undisclosed business relationships with related parties of corporate officers. A parent's spouse is defined as a related party." I looked at Marla. "You, Ms. Sutter, are my father's spouse. You are a related party." Mr. Klein started to raise a hand. "Now, see here. My client was—" "I have not finished my presentation," I said, without looking at him. He put his hand down. Next slide. Vendor 8814. Sutter Vitality, LLC. A flowchart appeared. Sutter Vitality, LLC, a shell corporation registered to a UPS store, has received 3 payments from Redbridge, totaling $142,000, for services designated as wellness and community engagement. Next slide. Financial audit trail. It showed the bank transfers, Redbridge, to Sutter Vitality, to a joint account, the joint account, to an American Express card. These funds were not used for business expenses. They were used to pay for a personal vacation to Sankey Bart's, categorized as retreat site scouting, and for personal expenses at retail locations. Marla's face was tightening. Jace was visibly sweating. Next slide. Document forgery. The 2 contracts appeared side by side. The cryptographic timestamps circled in red. Our forensics team has confirmed that the digital signature on Contract 3, dated September 5th, is a digital copy of the signature from Contract 1, dated April 12th. This is a forgery. The lawyer, Klein, was shuffling his papers, his face pale. Next slide. PO violation. Furthermore, internal audit confirms no purchase order was ever requested, approved, or issued for any of these payments. A direct violation of our procurement policy. I paused. I let the weight of the fraud settle in the room. The only sound was the lawyer wiping his damp palms on his trousers. "And finally, I said, the issue of vendor conduct." Next slide. Nexus Event, 10/19/2025. The title hung in the air. On Sunday, October 19th, the vendor's principal, Ms. Sutter, was made aware of this pre-audit. She responded by physically assaulting a corporate officer in an attempt to obstruct the investigation. Klein shot to his feet. "Objection! This is outrageous. This is a private, domestic matter. It has no bearing on this review. You have no proof of—" "Please sit down, Mr. Klein," I said, my voice still perfectly level. "I am now presenting Exhibit A." I pressed the button. The screen filled with the wide-angle view of my father's backyard. The video was silent by default, which made it all the more brutal. The clinical quiet of the 27th floor boardroom was filled with the image of Marla, her face a mask of rage, shoving me hard against the shed. We watched her lean in. I clicked the audio on. Her voice, sharp and hissing, filled the room, amplified by the high-tech speakers. "Stop digging into my payments." The video ended. The screen went black. A silence so profound, so heavy, descended on the room that I could hear the faint tick of the wall clock. Miles Harding, the board member, was staring at the blank screen, his face granite. Sarah Riley from HR had her hand over her mouth. Mark Davies, the auditor, had been holding a pen. It slipped from his numb fingers. It hit his legal pad with a soft thud, then clattered onto the polished granite table. The sound was an explosion. Mr. Klein, the lawyer, was gaping. He had clearly not been shown this video. He was apoplectic, sputtering. That's a family squabble, a misunderstanding. It was an accident. She was trying to keep her from falling. It was a playful slip. I let him finish his frantic, desperate dance. I let the word accident hang in the air. Then, I turned my head slowly and met his gaze. My voice was ice. Accidents don't generate invoices. Mr. Klein. I didn't need to argue. I had colleagues for that. I looked to the CHRO. Ms. Riley, your findings on the HR component? Sarah Riley dropped her hand, her face hardening. Sheila Vance has been suspended pending termination. She has provided a full confession, stating she was pressured by Ms. Sutter, who leveraged her family connection to Ms. Rowan to bypass procurement. She confirms she manually pushed the payments and fabricated the contracts at Ms. Sutter's direction. I looked at Mark Davies. Mr. Davies? Audit? Mark adjusted his glasses. No PO, no statement of work, no deliverables. It's the cleanest case of vendor fraud I've seen in a decade. Marla had been staring at the table. Now, her head snapped up. The lawyer was irrelevant. The committee was irrelevant. She looked at me. The mask was gone. It was just pure, unfiltered hatred. I turned back to the table and picked up a single, thick, leather-bound document. I did not throw it. I did not slam it down. I slid it, with quiet, deliberate force, across the 20 feet of polished granite. It glided silently, like a puck on ice, coming to a perfect stop directly in front of Mr. Klein. This, I said, is a formal notice of contract termination for cause. It includes a demand for full and immediate repayment of all $142,000 disbursed to Sutter Vitality LLC, to be paid within 10 business days. Failure to comply will result in this entire file, including the evidence of forgery and assault, being turned over to the district attorney's office. The blood drained from the lawyer's face. Jace made a small, sick noise. But Marla didn't look at the document. She was still looking at me. Her voice was not a yell. It was a low, venomous whisper, meant only for me. But the sensitive microphones picked it up and broadcast it to the entire room. You are destroying this family, Tessa. I held her gaze. The room was silent, waiting for my response. I did not respond as a daughter. I did not respond as a stepdaughter. I responded as the head of compliance. Families aren't funded by fraud. I broke contact with her. I turned my head to Miles Harding, the board member at the end of the table. I had presented my case. The prosecution rested. He didn't need to deliberate. He hadn't taken his eyes off the blank screen where the video had played. He looked at me, then at Marla, then back at me. He nodded. Once, a short, sharp, final gesture. Ms. Rowan's recommendation is accepted. The vendor is suspended, effective immediately. Mr. Klein, legal will pursue clawback and all other remedies. This meeting is adjourned. It was over. I closed my laptop. The big screen went dark. The lawyer was frantically stuffing his useless papers into his briefcase. Jace looked like he was going to be sick. Marla just sat there, frozen, staring at her own reflection in the black granite. She had been so focused on the emotional win at the cookout, she never saw the procedural execution being lined up. She was no longer a vendor. She was just a liability. And I was done with her. The corporate execution was complete. The domestic execution was scheduled for Thursday. Mr. Garrison's office was the antithesis of the Red Bridge Tower, where my world was glass and steel. His was old-growth mahogany, leather-bound books that smelled of dust and paper, and thick Persian rugs that absorbed all sound. It was the kind of room where fortunes were preserved and families were discreetly dismantled. The air was heavy with the quiet, ancestral power of old money and binding contracts. My father, Robert, had called this meeting. He sat beside me on a stiff, leather couch. He looked small, his skin pale and papery. Opposite us, in two brocaded armchairs, sat Marla and her lawyer, Mr. Klein. Klein looked even more haggard than he had in the boardroom, his scuffed briefcase resting at his feet like a tired dog. Marla, by contrast, was attempting a performance of wounded dignity. She wore a high-necked cream blouse, her hair pulled back. She looked like a victim. Mr. Garrison, a man in his late 60s with a face of courteous granite, sat behind his massive desk. He had been my family's lawyer for 30 years. He had drafted my mother's will, and, at my quiet insistence, he had drafted my father's prenuptial agreement with Marla. In the center of his desk, that agreement lay open. "Robert, Marla," Garrison began, his voice a low, smooth baritone. "You have asked me to review your prenuptial agreement, specifically in light of certain events that have been brought to my attention." Klein immediately squared his shoulders. "Mr. Garrison, my client is here under protest. We contend that the actions of Ms. Rowan's employer are a separate, corporate matter and have no bearing on this domestic agreement." "That, Mr. Klein," Garrison interrupted, holding up a hand, "is precisely what we are here to determine." He adjusted his half-moon glasses and looked down at the document. "I will draw your attention to Clause 12, Section B, the Moral and Ethical Forfeiture Clause. I will read the relevant portion." He cleared his throat. "In the event that either party is found to have engaged in any act of gross financial misconduct, criminal fraud, or financial malfeasance." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Or is found to have committed an act of physical battery or willful harassment against the other party or the other party's immediate family, which is subsequently substantiated by evidence." He looked up, letting his gaze rest on Marla for a single, heavy second. "All claims by the offending party to the joint marital assets, including the joint marital fund and all supplementary benefits, shall be rendered null and void." Klein scoffed. "Substantiated by evidence? That's a vague, subjective term. A baseless corporate allegation is not substantiated." "That is where you are incorrect, counsel," Garrison said, his voice hardening. "The term was specifically chosen for its high legal burden. It requires more than an accusation. It requires proof." He turned his head slightly. "Ms. Rowan, you indicated you have brought the substantiation." This was my cue, but I did not speak. I had come prepared. I placed two identical, 1-inch thick, navy blue binders on the coffee table between us. I slid one across the polished wood to Mr. Garrison. I slid the other in front of my father. "Robert, no!" Marla's voice was sharp. "You can't look at that. It's lies. She's poisoning you." My father stared at the binder as if it were a snake. His hand, when he reached for it, was shaking so badly he could barely grasp the cover. "Tessa," he whispered, his eyes pleading with me. "Please." "Open it, Dad," I said, my voice quiet, but stripped of all warmth. "You wanted peace. This is what your peace was built on." He flinched, then opened the cover. "Tab 1, I narrated, my voice the only sound in the room, directed at Garrison. "The official finding of the Redbridge Analytics Ethics Subcommittee, dated yesterday, it confirms the suspension of vendor Sutter Vitality LLC for cause. The findings include systematic benefits fraud, contract forgery, and conspiracy with a Redbridge employee." My father made a small, sick sound. He was looking at the letterhead. "Tab 2, I continued, "the formal demand for repayment of $142,000. "This is slander," Klein shouted, half rising from his chair. "We will be filing for damages." "Tab 3, I said, my voice cutting through his. "The complete financial audit. showing the flow of funds from Redbridge to Sutter Vitality, to a joint account held by your client, and then directly to an American Express card in her name. The line items include a 2-week vacation to St. Bart's and all food and alcohol purchases for the family cookouts billed to my employer as employee engagement. My father's head snapped up. He looked at Marla. The parties? The food? This was the moment. The tears Marla had been holding in reserve began to flow. It was a perfect performance. "Robert, darling, listen to me," she sobbed, leaning forward. "It's all a misunderstanding. It's her. She's always hated me. She's always been jealous of us. She's using her power at that company to frame me, to destroy us. She faked those documents. She's trying to break up our marriage." "She's right," Klein piled on, seizing the emotional defense. "And as for the alleged battery, that's even more preposterous. A grainy, edited video from a disgruntled neighbor? That's not substantiated evidence, Mr. Garrison. It's a fabrication. It's a deepfake, for all we know." My father was wavering. His face was a mask of desperate hope, wanting, begging to believe her. "Tessa, is that true? A deepfake?" I met his gaze. The last shred of his denial was infuriating. I turned to my binder and flipped, not to the next tab, but to the end. I pulled out a single, high-resolution 8x10 photograph, the one I had taken in my apartment. I placed it on the table in front of him, the angry purple and black bruise on my shoulder, the raw scrape where I had hit the shed. He recoiled as if I had struck him. "The video," I said, turning my attention back to Garrison, "was simply the starting point. Please see tab 4. Garrison turned the page. "Tab 4, I said, "is the full metadata and hash report for the file backyardcam 17.44 or it verifies the file's integrity, creation time, and that it has not been altered by a single bit." Tab 5. The sworn, notarized affidavit from the neighbor, Alan Henderson, the file's source, attesting under penalty of perjury that it is an unaltered, original recording from his system. Tab 6. The full chain of custody log, documenting the file's transfer from Mr. Henderson to myself, and from myself to my attorney, and from my attorney to the Redbridge Forensics Lab, which independently verified the hash. I paused. The evidence, Mr. Garrison, is substantiated. The corporate fraud is substantiated. The assault is substantiated. The criteria for Clause 12B have been met. Garrison finished reading the affidavit. He slowly took off his glasses, polishing them with a cloth. He looked at Marla, whose tears had abruptly stopped. Her face was a mask of pale, cold fury. He turned to my father. "Robert, I am sorry, but she is correct." He looked at Klein. "The clause is activated." "You can't!" Marla shrieked, her voice cracking. "Robert, tell him. Tell him you don't believe her. It's just a family argument." My father was silent. He was just staring at the photograph of my bruise. "The clause is activated," Garrison repeated, his voice now a final, cold judgment. "Mr. Klein, you are welcome to fight this, as you said, but you will be fighting a verified chain of custody, a notarized witness affidavit, and a full corporate forensic audit. I would advise your client to consider her next steps very carefully." He turned back to the document. "Per the terms of the agreement, the consequences are immediate and non-negotiable." He ticked them off on his fingers. 1. Ms. Sutter's access to the joint marital fund is hereby and immediately terminated. The bank will be notified this afternoon. 2. The supplementary American Express card and all other joint credit lines are to be surrendered. They will be canceled by close of business today. 3. The clause requires a full restitution of all improperly diverted funds. This means Ms. Sutter will be required to repay, personally, the $142,000 to Redbridge, as well as reimbursing the joint marital fund for all personal expenses, including the St. Bart's vacation. And 4, Garrison said, looking at Marla with something approaching pity. Clause 12B temporarily reverts all shared property to the non-offending party to prevent further asset dissipation. As of this moment, Robert retains sole and exclusive right of residence at the Braxton Ridge property. You will be required to vacate. It was a total, systemic, legal annihilation. She was locked out, financially, and now, physically. I closed my binder. My work was done. I stood up. Dad, Mr. Garrison, if you'll excuse me. My father didn't look up. He was still staring at the photo. As I walked to the door, Marla's voice, no longer crying, no longer shrieking, but low and filled with pure venom, cut across the room. I hope you're happy, Tessa. I paused, my hand on the heavy brass doorknob. I did not turn around. I spoke to the room at large. I filed the petition for a permanent protective order this morning. My attorney informs me the hearing has been expedited by the judge. I turned the knob, pulling the heavy door open. He found the video and the notarized affidavit to be exceptionally compelling. I stepped out into the quiet hallway, pulling the door shut behind me, the click of the latch sounding as final as a gavel. I had not cried, I had not yelled, I had not argued. Truth, when it arrives in triplicate, bound in a navy blue binder with time-stamped logs and notarized signatures, has no need to raise its voice. It simply is. Friday, the quarterly town hall. The auditorium at Redbridge headquarters was designed to impress. It seated 500 employees, with tiered levels of seating sweeping down to a wide, low stage. The acoustics were perfect. The lighting was state-of-the-art. Behind the stage, a 40-foot LED screen glowed with the serene, blue Redbridge logo. The air hummed with the low murmur of hundreds of conversations, the collective energy of a company at the peak of its power. I stood in the wings, my presentation loaded on the teleprompter. My topic was the final one of the day, the typically dry procedural slot before the CEO's closing remarks, Q3 compliance report. My name was called. I walked out onto the stage. The murmur died down. 500 faces turned to look at me. The spotlights were warm, but I felt nothing. I was not Tessa Rowan. Stepdaughter, I was not Tessa Rowan. The woman with the bruised shoulder. I was the head of ethics and compliance, and this was my domain. Good afternoon, I began, my voice even and clear, filling the auditorium. For the past quarter, our department has focused on a critical, often overlooked area of corporate risk, the integrity of our benefits programs. I clicked the remote. The screen behind me changed to a simple, elegant slide. Integrity and benefits. Trust as an asset. I didn't talk about Sutter Vitality. I didn't talk about Marla, or Jace, or Sheila Vance. I spoke in abstracts. I spoke about the fiduciary duty we have to our employees to ensure that every dollar spent on their well-being is legitimate. I spoke about the vulnerabilities inherent in discretionary spending and the methods used by third-party actors to exploit trust and personal relationships to bypass procurement protocols. I presented it as a case study in institutional defense. I was not telling a story of revenge. I was giving a lecture on risk mitigation. The presentation was concise. It was professional. It was, on the surface, incredibly boring. But I knew my audience. They were analysts. They were data scientists. They understood that the most devastating truths are often found in the driest data. To that end, I said, nearing my conclusion, we have developed a new risk matrix for vendor assessment in the benefits space. I clicked again. The screen filled with a large grid. Most of the squares were green or yellow, filled with technical terms like invoice validation and credential verification. But in the upper right corner, there was one square, glowing a deep, angry red. Inside the red square, the text was simple. Vendor X. Identified pattern of community-based manipulation. A quiet ripple went through the audience. Vendor X was an anonymization, but the description was shockingly specific. I let the image hang there for a moment. This red flag designation is triggered when a vendor shows a pattern of leveraging non-corporate relationships, familial, social, or otherwise, to create the appearance of legitimacy, thereby circumventing standard financial controls. It represents the highest level of trust erosion. I looked out across the sea of faces, and then I saw her. She had slipped in through a side door at the back, standing in the shadows of the upper tier. Marla. She was wearing the same beige power suit, now slightly rumpled. She must have been waiting, thinking this was her moment. She believed I was about to name her, to air our dirty laundry in front of 500 people. Her plan, I realized with a flash of cold clarity, was to play the victim on a grand scale, to interrupt my presentation with cries of a vindictive stepdaughter abusing her corporate power. She was here to turn my professional stage into her personal soapbox. She had, as always, fundamentally miscalculated. This was never about me. "If I can have the lights dimmed, please," I said into the microphone. The house lights went down, leaving me in a single, tight spotlight. The red square on the screen glowed with an almost malevolent intensity. "The ultimate cost of this kind of breach is not financial," I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing the entire room in. "When our benefits programs are exploited, the first victim isn't the bottom line, it's trust." I let the word hang in the silent, darkened auditorium. Trust. This was the moment Marla had been waiting for. I saw her take a breath, preparing to launch her counterattack, to shout from the back row. She never got the chance. Another figure moved out of the wings and into the light beside me. Arthur Kendrick, our chairman and CEO, a man with a mane of silver hair and the quiet, absolute authority of a king. He placed a hand gently on my shoulder, a gesture of both support and dismissal, and stepped up to the lectern. The spotlight widened to include him. "Thank you, Tessa," he said, his voice a calm, powerful baritone that needed no amplification. He turned to the audience. "I want to be clear. Vendor X is not a hypothetical, as of yesterday morning. Redbridge Analytics has permanently terminated its relationship with a benefits vendor, Sutter Vitality LLC, for the reasons Ms. Rowan has just outlined." A collective, soft gasp went through the room. He had named her. "The compliance department," Kendrick continued, "headed by Ms. Rowan, conducted a swift and thorough investigation. Their work was a model of professionalism and integrity. We are grateful for the diligence of the entire unit that brought this to light and protected our company and our people." He was validating the process, not me. It was perfect. As he spoke, the main doors at the back of the auditorium swung open with a soft, hydraulic hiss. The sudden daylight cut a sharp rectangle into the darkness. Two figures were silhouetted there. One was a member of our corporate security team. The other was a uniformed civil process server. Every head in the back rows turned. The process server moved with a quiet, unhurried purpose down the aisle, his eyes fixed on the figure in the beige suit. The entire auditorium was silent, watching this slow, inexorable march. He stopped at Marla's row. He said her name, too quietly for me to hear, but the effect was a shockwave. He held out a folded white legal document. "The protective order, served in front of 500 witnesses." On stage, Kendrick concluded, "Redbridge has a zero-tolerance policy for fraud and a zero-tolerance policy for the intimidation of our employees. This issue is now closed." A single person began to clap, then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium erupted in applause. It wasn't for me. It was for Kendrick's decisiveness. It was for the abstract, beautiful idea that the system had worked, that the rules had won. It was a standing ovation for the integrity of the process. I stepped back from the lectern and gave Kendrick a slight, formal bow of acknowledgement. I turned to the screen, which still showed the glowing red square, and clicked the remote one last time. The risk matrix vanished. It was replaced by 4 simple words in stark white letters on a black screen. No receipts, no benefits. I looked back up to the top row. The process server was gone. Marla was frozen, the white document clutched in her hand. The spotlights from the stage hit her face, and in the harsh, clinical light, Her carefully constructed mask of victimhood seemed to shatter. Her face was no longer one thing, but a collection of sharp angles and terrified shadows, like a portrait seen through broken glass. She stumbled backward, turned, and fled through the doors, swallowed by the darkness. The applause began to die down. In the sudden quiet, my phone vibrated in my suit pocket. I pulled it out, keeping it below the level of the lectern. A text from Mr. Henderson. A new Dropbox link. Below it, a single line of text. Found this from Saturday night. Thought the timeline might be useful. Nice fireworks. I didn't need to open it. I knew what it was. A video of the party the night before the cookout. A perfect, time-stamped alibi for the camera's correct function, and proof that Marla had been there, in that yard, for the entire weekend. The final, redundant, beautiful nail in a coffin that was already buried a mile deep. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The cut was complete. Late afternoon. The sun was low, casting long, distorted shadows across the lawn in Braxton Ridge. I returned to the backyard. It was silent. The party felt like it had happened a lifetime ago. The air was cool now, carrying only the clean, damp scent of cut grass and fallen leaves. The shed wall, where my shoulder had hit, bore a faint, jagged scuff mark in the peeling brown paint, a small scar on the face of the house. A patch of grass nearby, where my phone had fallen, was still visibly flattened, a darker shade of green. The evidence was still there, written on the landscape. My father was sitting on the back steps, the ones leading up to the deck. He wasn't looking at anything in particular, just staring out at the trees that bordered the property. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, hollowed out by the truth. I walked over and sat down on the step below him, not touching, leaving a space between us. I placed one of the navy blue binders, his copy, on the concrete beside him. I said nothing. The silence stretched, filled only by the rustle of a squirrel in the oak tree. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice a dry rasp. He didn't look at me. "I'm sorry I didn't look at the clip when you first told me." It was the apology he needed to make, the one that admitted his willful blindness. The air cleared, just a little. I looked at the scuff mark on the shed. "You didn't need to see the clip, Dad," I replied, my voice flat, not unkind, but devoid of pity. "You just saw it through a whole system, the legal system, the corporate system. That's enough. It was the only absolution I could offer, the comfort of procedure, the certainty of an audit." A white van pulled into the driveway, the crunch of its tires on the gravel loud in the stillness. The locksmith. A young man in a blue jumpsuit got out, carrying a metal toolbox. He gave a short, professional nod as he walked past us to the back door, and the sounds of drilling and metal scraping began to echo from inside the house. A new deadbolt, a new key, a new reality being installed. The supplementary credit cards had been canceled an hour ago. The vague promises of a peaceful future, paid for with lies, had been canceled along with them. Every lock was being changed. I pulled out my phone and sent a text message to Mr. Henderson. It was brief. "Thank you. A clip saved a house." His reply came back in less than a minute. "Glad to hear it. The truth makes for quiet neighbors." The locksmith finished his work at the back door and moved around to the front. The sounds of drilling faded. I stood up and walked over to the barbecue grill. It was cold to the touch, the metal beaded with evening dew. The briquettes inside were a uniform, ghostly gray ash, a graveyard of a party. I reached out and lowered the heavy black lid. It closed with a solid metallic clang, a sound of finality that echoed in the quiet yard. It sounded like a vault door swinging shut, like the bolt of a lock sliding home. As the sound faded, my phone vibrated in my hand. It wasn't a text message. It was a corporate broadcast email from Redbridge, the kind sent to all senior staff after a major incident resolution. Subject: Official Notice. Vendor Relationship Termination, Body. This email serves as formal notification that Redbridge Analytics has, effective immediately, terminated its relationship with vendor Sutter Vitality LLC for cause. Following a review by the Ethics Subcommittee, a full restitution of all disbursed funds has been secured. The matter is now closed. Clean, final, no emotion, just a transaction completed, a liability erased from the ledger. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The locksmith's van started up in the driveway and pulled away. The house was secure. The company was secure. I looked over the cedar fence, toward Mr. Henderson's property, at his side door, mounted under the eaves. The small black dome of his security camera was aimed, as always, at the property line. As the dusk deepened, its tiny infrared light began to pulse. A slow, steady, rhythmic blink of red. Watching, recording, objective. It was still on. It was always on. Thank you so much for listening to the story. I'd love to know your thoughts, so please comment below and let me know where in the world you're tuning in from. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And to help this story reach more listeners, please hit that hype button. Your support means the world.